You're lying to me. Hello everyone and welcome to Anime Club After Dark's Movie Reviews, a spoiler-free discussion detailing the good, the bad, and the downright ridiculous of anime movies. I'm your host Alex and I am joined tonight by our poser extraordinaire Nitai.
So yeah, tonight we have a shit ton of ridiculous when it comes to this movie, right?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. So this is the first movie review we've done, which technically isn't a movie. We're going to be doing an OVA.
Yeah.
But what we're going to be talking about is a little OVA called Angel's Egg. So I do want to get through some of the introductory details first for those who may not be aware. This is an OVA from, it was first released on the 15th of December, 1985. So it's older than I am.
Is that possible,
It was
Alex?
you wouldn't think, but lo and behold, it is. And it was both directed and written by Mamoru Oshii. Yes, the same Mamoru Oshii who gave us Ghost in the Shell.
The goat.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty good.
He's pretty good.
The crazy thing about this is that it was produced by, yes, and you're hearing this right, Studio Dean.
Yeah, Dean.
The same studio that gave us Konosuba.
Yeah, Dean and were at it for the longest time. Even before the 80s.
It's so funny. I've mentioned on the podcast before, Dean is like the sine wave of the anime industry. Like they're up and they're down. They're up and they're down. They're up and they're down. They go from being really good to really shit.
Yeah, they're the wild card studio. You just don't know.
They really are. And we have the character designs for this, which, let's be honest, there's only two characters in this whole thing. Was done by Yoshitaka Amano.
Which you may know as the original character designer for Final Fantasy and a lot of other stuff.
That's very true.
From what I could tell, it seemed like a very, very much like his and Oshii's like production, like project, so to speak. Like, this was like their project. They were like very much the heads of it, which is really interesting.
Yes, for sure. It was sort of a co-creation thing between the two of them.
Yeah.
But the story, from what I was able to tell, pretty much sprang whole from Mamoru Oshii's mind. Now, normally with our movie reviews, I tend to go and research like what the budget was for the production and see if I can get some box office results. Because I cannot find any evidence that this was ever either in Japan or outside of Japan debuted or shown in any theaters whatsoever, so I couldn't find any kind of box office receipts at all. If anyone out there can, please let me know and give me the source for it, because I was unable to find it.
Yeah, because this, like as you said, is from 1995, which was the OVA boom of the 80s, sort of, for Japan.
Yes,
like you're
looking at the same time that a bunch of OVA projects were coming out.
Just a shit ton of OVAs were produced back then, and it seemed like people were just throwing money at people to just do it. Oh, you have an idea, just go for it, do it. It's a really
there's a
weird
lot
time.
of experimentation going on back then, and it shows with something like what we're going to be talking about here tonight with Angel's Egg. Now, I also could not find any kind of legit numbers or anything that I could verify in regards to the budget that this project had. I have, however, heard rumors, and of course I cannot verify this. If anyone out there does have a source that can verify it, please share it with us below in the comments. But I have heard multiple times people have said that Mamoru Oshii himself at least partially funded this project. I can't find anything verifying that, but I've heard it from multiple people before, so I'm just throwing that out there. But I couldn't find any kind of numbers as to what kind of budget this project had overall. So, I mean, normally this is the part where I would tell you that. I don't have any numbers to give you. I can, however, tell you that this has a runtime of 71 minutes, so it is just over an hour and 11 minutes long.
Yeah, it's not a long watch.
Yeah, it is a pretty short watch, especially in terms of some of the movies that we have reviewed here previously. But let's actually talk about the art and animation a little bit. So since this is as old as it is, right? It's all hand drawn. Like,
yes,
any CG that they used was very rudimentary, and I think the only CG that I even saw any kind of evidence for was there was one little lighting effect in it that I think was CG, but I can't verify it. But it was a very short thing, and it was like over in half a second.
Yeah, it's very much the prime of cell animation, you could say. That era, sort
and
of.
like it, and I would say largely its animation holds up. I mean, it's a little rough in some parts, but I think it holds up.
I think what carries it is the art direction, and especially the background art. The backgrounds in this OVA, this movie, are incredible. They look amazing. Like you see the different structures in the city and like nature itself, and like just the architecture in general just looks incredible. I really dig the look of the film. It looks really cool.
Yeah, and like the abandoned city that this largely takes place in and around, like very Victorian designs to everything too, especially like that fountain at the center of the city.
Yeah, that's right.
You got like the buildings just look like they're ripped out of some kind of English city somewhere in like the Victorian era.
But then you have like stuff in this movie that then look just otherworldly, like there's like different structures and some like there's like a moment there where you see this like group of tanks sort of like going through the street, but they're like they have these like cockroaches
like
parts. Yeah, it's very, very, very strange. It's very strange.
When I first saw that, I thought all of that was like one large tank with multiple guns. And like it took me a second to realize, no, that's just multiple tanks going down the street at the same time.
And they have these like sort of like weird sort of like cockroach like whiskers or like things that move inside them. It's ethereal. If I would have to describe this movie as something, is ethereal. It's very, very
and like I call them aliens because the movie itself never describes what they actually are. But it looks like a very alien design, especially in comparison to what you're seeing around the city, which looks, very like what you would expect out of a like a late 19th century city design.
Mm-hmm. It's also reflected in some of like the designs for the character themselves. Like it feels like a mishmash. Like you have the main character, like the girl who is just a girl dressed in this like sort of like dress or whatever you want to call it, and then you have the boy, which has this it looks like a warrior, like a lone warrior with this strange cross-like weapon. And then later in the movie, you see this like group of people who are dressed like sort of soldiers, but not really. It's weird. It's very strange.
It is, and yeah, like you said, the designs are very much a mishmash. You have these things that look very alien and almost bug-like.
Yeah.
And then mixed with things that are just very old school, like I say, Victorian English designs.
Yeah,
it is. It's a big contrast, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I also love that the color palette for this is very dark. You have a lot of blacks, a lot of grays, a lot of blues. And get used to that. If you're a fan of bright colors, you're not gonna like this art style.
Nah, I mean this film is very grim to some aspect. It's like
I would say it certainly fits the tone of what the overall quote unquote story of this is, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I think its color palette definitely fits the tone itself. And
also, I think it's very, very important to mention this for the listeners that this movie is avant-garde as fuck. If you
like as much as we talk about like the Monogatari series being avant-garde, at least the Monogatari series has an overall story to follow. This really doesn't.
Yeah, this movie doesn't feel the need to explain itself very much. It's avant-garde in the entire sense of the word, and some people that's not for them, and that's totally cool. Like this movie doesn't explain itself.
It's worth mentioning if you go into this expecting the story to answer all the questions you have, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, you need to sort of piece it yourself to some extent, find your own interpretation for it, which is cool. Like I dig that sort of stuff. But I know that this movie is like it's as much as we love anime for its weirdness. That this is why I am so happy we're doing these movie reviews, because it allows us to also seek out even weirder stuff, just like Angel's Egg, which is cool.
Oh, for sure. I also before we move on, I definitely also want to talk about like there are some scenes art wise in here that just make you go, what the fuck? Because they'll be walking through there's a scene where they're walking through the city, and like all of a sudden they turn a corner and they go into a building, and it's like suddenly they're in the belly of a fucking whale, because you got whale bones all around you, and like, and you're like, what the fuck? What am I doing? And then there's like giant fish shadows going all over the place,
and the fishermen hunting them, even though they're shadows. It's it's weird. It's very hard to this movie is very hard to describe, in the sense of like, we can just go beat for beat like what happens in the movie, but it's very much a film. Like, it's a visual story. You need to experience like what, like, in order to really get it, I think you need to just watch it for yourself, because it just sometimes it doesn't explain it at all, except for just the images you see on the screen and how they convey it. It's really cool.
For sure. Let's talk about the sound, though.
Okay.
One thing it's definitely worth taking away from this is, while there is some dialogue, there's very little.
Probably like 10 lines or so.
I think both. So this is, like I said, a 71-minute movie, and I think between the two characters that speak in this, I think there's 15 lines of dialogue between the two of them in 71 minutes.
And most of it is loaded at the back end of the movie. Like, for the most part, for like the first 40 or like 50 or so minutes of the movie, like sometimes someone will say a sentence, but that's it. And not much not a whole lot. Only by the end, sort of, they start to delve into more details about sort of this world that they inhabit. It's very weird.
It's also worth mentioning that when they do have dialogue, there'll be like a scene. A good example is, there's a scene where I would say it's near the middle point of the movie, where the boy and the girl meet. And there's a scene where she's like really apprehensive about him. Of course, he's a stranger, and whatever. And she asks, like, who are you? And then he just stares at her, and then like there's a hard cut, right? And the next scene you see is them just walking side by side, and you're like, well, obviously something happened between then and there. There was probably a lot of dialogue that we didn't see as a viewer.
It's very much like, but they do show, I like how they show visually sort of the bond between these two characters throughout the film. Like, it's not very literal about it. They don't really explain it, but you can see how slowly they get closer and further apart for like this and that reason. But again, they don't really feel the need to explain themselves too much. We don't actually know like where the girl came from, or like to some extent where the boy came from. Like, we sort of learn towards the end some stuff, but it's very open to interpretation. Like, there are many elements in the movie that don't get explained almost at all, and are very much like, you need to look at it. Okay, definitely, like, there's some symbols here that mean something. Let's dive in. Let's see why. Why is that? What is this movie trying to like elicit from you as a viewer? Yeah.
And then getting back to the music itself, so there is a very interesting soundtrack to all this. I'd say it's more of like an ambient quality to it. And there's not a whole lot of like sound effects either. Like, even what sound effects there are typically are just like for the quote unquote action sequences. And I use that term kind of very loosely. Like, there's the scene where the fishermen are all trying to hunt the fish shadows.
It's weird.
That has some sound effects in it, but like, even like there's scenes with like really the rain is just pouring down, but there's no actual sound effects for the rain.
Yeah.
But the OST for this was done by a guy named Yoshihiro Kano, and as far as I can tell, this is the only anime soundtrack he's ever done. All of his other works, he did do one other work, I think it was in 1997, which was for a stage play. But all of his other music that he has ever released has been like classical and jazz albums. And
That's
this is
so
the
cool.
only anime OST he's ever done, which is very much like the when we talked about in Akira, the guy who did the music for that. He was a scientist by trade, so music was like his hobby.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
Weird. 80s were
so
weird like that, man.
Yeah. It's such a cool era to go back to.
They didn't have dedicated people just doing anime OSTs all the time.
That's so cool. Like I kind of like that. I would like, oh, it's sort of, yeah, fuck it, I'll do a soundtrack for you, I guess. Boom.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I guess.
I like anime titties. Sure, I'll make a soundtrack for you.
Yeah. Well, this is the first movie review we've done in a while where there have been no titties.
I know, right?
Where was I going with this?
I don't know, but it's yeah, it's weird. Like we sort of like try and not delve into too many details, because if we talk about the story again, it's just very, it's like you can just summarize it in like a sentence or so, but there's so much more to it.
If you go into this and you try and take the story at face value for what it's showing you, you're gonna be, number one, hella confused and very disappointed.
Yes,
because this is not a straightforward story. So
and
instead
it's
of
very
actually
slow.
focusing, it's very slow.
Like glacial
even for a
paced.
71-minute long presentation, it's very, very slow. But one thing I did want to talk about, instead of actually focusing on the narrative itself, I want to focus more on the symbolism that you see throughout the story. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, of Christian symbology throughout the running of this.
Are fish like prominent symbolism in Christianity, may I ask?
Yeah, because
Really?
have you never heard the story of Jesus and the fish?
Which one?
Where he, the one where he's at the feast and he turns the water into wine and he
Oh,
feeds
yeah.
he feeds like an entire mass full of people with like one fish.
Oh yeah, that one I know, because like we talked about these like shadow fishes. The city, there's a lot of architecture there. There's like fishes, like you see this fountain. It's like out of like the water comes out of like this statue of a fish, and like all of the arcs have fishes on them, and there's like this one cathedral with the fish glasses, like glass painting on it. Just like it's everywhere if you look for it.
Also, have you never heard of the ichthys?
The what?
The ichthys. It's
I don't know
here
that.
in the United States, it's a symbol that looks like a fish, and it's a Christian symbol. Here in the United States, there's a lot of Christians who will put images of this on the backs of their cars. I'm actually going to send you a link to it right now so you can see what it looks like.
What does it symbolize?
It's supposed to symbolize that story of
Oh, it's just for like because of the story of Jesus.
Yeah, where Jesus multiplies the loaves of bread and the fish.
Oh, okay. Weird.
But anyway, I listen. Christian symbology can be weird sometimes, but yeah, this movie, or this OVA rather, is loaded with it. I mean, and I did a little bit of digging on this, and apparently prior to the production of this, Mamoru Oshii, who was the writer and director of this, he was born and raised as a Christian Japanese man, Catholic, and he had started to lose his faith in Christianity prior to the production of this. So if you actually go into that knowing that, I look at a lot of this symbology thinking of, like, at the beginning of it, we're seeing someone who has lost their faith, and then by the end of it, they're trying really hard to regain it.
I don't know if I agree with you on, like, the whole journey to regain your Christian, like it's an interesting interpretation now that I think about it. But what I can say for sure, it feels like these two characters represent sort of like people who believe in religion and people who don't, or are skeptic of it, which is really cool. And I like how they represent that. I like how like the girl is very much into like she has a goal in mind. She believes it. It doesn't matter the details. Like, and there's this one interaction between them where she describes like hearing things inside the egg. She's like, I can hear it slowly breathing. And the boy, who is very much represented as like someone who's skeptic of religion, is like, that's you just hearing your own breathing. And then she said, I can hear it like wings flapping in the air, like in the wind. And he's like, that's just you like hearing your own heartbeat or something like that. It's that interaction by itself is like, I think, the most interesting to me in the film. That
interaction was one of the most interesting in the entire run of the OVA, in my
because you heard that sometime in your life. You heard like two people arguing about something, and one of them is very much, I don't know if naive, but very much like believes in something that's not tangible, and then someone's like saying, nah, that's not it. There's an explanation for that. It's not it.
And that's exactly what religion is. It's a belief in something that's not tangible.
Yeah, actually, yeah. It's a really cool dialogue.
Yeah, that interaction, because she had the girl has faith that whatever is inside this egg is going to be beautiful, and it's going to be, worthwhile, and it's going to be worth doing for its own sake, letting it hatch.
Yeah, it doesn't matter for what's inside.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what's inside, because she has faith that whatever it is, it's going to be worth it. It's like a believer, a Christian believer's faith that, whatever heaven is like, it's going to be worth getting there.
Yeah. It's like,
very
much
And the boy
so.
is like the eternal skeptic, which some people might attribute that to being an atheist. I attribute it to being more agnostic, where like he's willing to listen to her and maybe believe what she believes if she can offer proof.
It's very interesting how confrontational is sort of presented at the beginning, because it's very much like, what's in the egg? And she's like, she doesn't reply. And he repeats that question many times, and she just doesn't reply, till eventually she's like, it's almost like doesn't matter for her. She believes there is something in it, because again, that's her faith. And the more I think about that interaction, that sort of dialogue between the two, the more it's interesting to me. I really dig that.
Yeah, I do too, and I love the symbology of it. Again, I know that this is going to be something that people are going to go into, and they're going to hate it. I think a lot of people today would probably go in and hate it, because number one, you're not getting spoon-fed everything, and number two, you have to dig really deep into this symbology to understand what's going on. Not to say that people, I don't think, can do that. It's just that people don't really want to do that anymore, it seems.
But I do think the ending of the movie is very satisfying, because it puts into perspective a whole lot of things, and it made things click for me, at least, when thinking about the movie. Like at first you just watch it, the movie ends, but then you're like, oh, okay, there is something there.
And especially, so one thing that really threw me for a loop watching this was, and near the midpoint of the story, the boy recounts the biblical tale of Noah's Ark, which I think a lot of people know. If you haven't, if you're one of the 5 people out there who's never heard of Noah's Ark, go look it up. I'm not going to recount the entire story from the Bible for you. But the thing that drove me for a loop, as someone myself who was raised Christian, I'm very much familiar with the story, and I know very well how it goes. And then like halfway through him telling the story, it completely deviates into this thing I've never heard of before, about like, so in the story, in the actual story of Noah's Ark, they send out a dove, and then the dove comes back with, if I remember right, it's a piece of an olive branch.
Piece of olive branch, yeah.
Yeah,
to sort of signify that the flood is over and safe to.
The flood is over, and there's actually dry land somewhere. And then that's how they know that like there's actual hope. That's why doves are supposed to symbolize hope. But in the story that he recounts, the dove never actually returns, and the passengers completely forget why they're even on the boat, and the animals all turn to stone.
Yeah, which is so cool. I really like that, because then it goes again, like we talk about, we don't really know where these people came from, and I like how that goes into the story. It's like, yeah, and some people just so long has passed that some people don't even remember if they were looking for a dove, waiting for it to come back.
Yeah, and I think that's all that kind of goes into like losing your faith too, because after a while, if you never try to reconnect with your faith, you're gonna forget you ever had it.
It's really cool. The moment they started recounting that story, I was like, oh shit. Because it's
I feel like even you as a Jew are very familiar with this story.
I mean, very much so. Like, that's one of the stories in the Bible that we learned about very early on in age. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, cool. even as someone yourself who's not Christian, you can even recognize the importance of this story.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it is in the Bible before it was in like it is from the Old Testament. That story originally. Yeah. So yeah, so I don't know.
That was the thing that really threw me for a loop watching this, because that's a story that I know very well, and then the way they're telling it is like it's not a way.
It's not the same. Yeah, exactly. Because that was also very surprising. I'm like, hold up. But it's cool.
So,
I like
funny
where that
thing,
went.
when I was actually after I got through watching that, I actually went and looked up the actual story of Noah's Ark. I'm
Wait, you forgot
surely none of that stuff actually happened, right?
I was about to ask if you forgot about the end of the story, but yeah, it's not the same as they describe it in the movie.
Yeah. I know that was the most surprising thing in this whole story for me. It was the one part where I mean, there were several parts where I was like, "What the fuck?" But this is the part where I was like, "Wait a minute, you're lying to me."
You lie as you breathe.
You lie as you breathe. But I think that's actually a really great symbol for, if you lose your faith and you never try and actually reconnect with it, you're probably going to forget you ever had it, which is what that story is, I think, trying to
convey,
instill.
Very much so. It's strange. I'm still not sure where the movie lands in terms of like a stance on faith, because it just presents you these like two extremes of a believer and a non-believer. But like there's a very like near the end of the movie there is like a certain event that sort of I think solidifies it for me whether it goes, and it's weird. I don't know, because like at the end of this episode we'll talk about like ratings and stuff, but it's very hard to me to put a finger on it whether I liked it or not, like enjoyed it rather than liked it, because I do recommend this movie. It is just so.
It's hard to say that I enjoyed it because it deals with some pretty deep stuff.
Yeah, you need to marinate it for a bit.
I wouldn't call it entertainment. I would call it like something that you watch to just have a little bit of inner reflection.
Yeah, very much so. I don't
know if I would call it entertainment, because I think if you go in trying to be entertained by it, you're gonna be disappointed.
It gets you thinking. It gets you thinking about again. I think we can agree that faith is just a really big theme in this movie, and it gets you thinking about like why would you put your place in faith for something like that. It's interesting. I'm not a very religious person. I mean, as I said, like I do, like in school here, you do learn a shit ton about like the Bible and the Old Testament and stories from that. But I was never really connected to. I was never a religious person. I never really believed in God or something like that. So for me, it's very like I know where I stand on it. This movie doesn't really challenge my perception and opinions on faith, but it is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and maybe it's just me, but even as someone who may not be particularly religious, you watch it and you can definitely see that the person who made this may be having a crisis of faith.
Yeah, very much so. I agree with that. Yeah, it's just a really interesting exploration of faith.
I definitely think that makes it worth watching, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I again would definitely recommend this movie.
So. I guess to finish this off, let's actually talk about our actual ratings. So what would we give this out of 10, Natai?
It's so weird to give this movie a number. It's I don't know how much this movie will stick with me, but I am really happy that I sought it out and watched it, and it did get me thinking for a bit. So while I recommend it to anyone who would really want to try something else and kind of weird that'll get him thinking, it's not a movie that I think I'll come back to often, but I do appreciate all of the production aspect of it as well as the themes that it's going to. But it's probably either an 8 but closer to a 9. It's 8 or a 9 for me. I think it's an 8, a high 8.
So I gave this a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
Although I think I would say for the same reasons that you did, I rated it as highly as I did. One thing that I definitely think hurt it is like I don't think there's a lot of rewatchability here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not something I feel like I have a need to come back to unless I'm using it to show it to other people. Because I definitely think that would be the only reason I would rewatch this. It's definitely beautiful. I think its animation and art have held up relatively well, considering how old this is.
Yeah,
and I think that its soundtrack it's not necessarily something I would listen to without watching the movie. I don't think.
Also, there's not a whole lot of soundtrack.
It's good. Don't get me wrong, and it definitely fits in. It's just not something I would listen to. And then the biggest thing is like it doesn't have any rewatchability for me. But I definitely respect how much symbology is in here, and I can almost feel watching this Momoroshi going through his crisis of faith before he started making this. So I love it. It's just I can't give it a huge high rating because I don't ever see myself coming back to watch this.
Yeah,
so that's Angel's Egg.
That's Angel's Egg.
Thank you for suggesting this entire. This is actually the first time I've heard of Angel's Egg before going into this. I had never actually sat down and to watch it.
My mission with these movie reviews is just to seek out movies that I haven't watched but like heard stuff about it seem interesting enough. Because I love this
John
weird
has
shit.
said John has said that his goal is just to watch movies again that he hasn't seen in a long time.
Which is cool. I like that each one of us has like his different like views to like to pick a movie. But yeah, I love weird shit, and this definitely is up my alley. And I just wanted to watch it for the longest time. So like, fuck it, let's try it because I knew it was weird. But yeah, let's do it. Pretty much.
Let's do it. Speaking of Mamoru Oshii throughout this whole thing, so it is my turn to choose. Is my turn now to choose a movie for our next movie review, and I'm going to stick with the Mamoru Oshii theme. So the next movie that we will be reviewing for our movie reviews is the original Ghost in the Shell movie from 1995.
Hell yeah!
One of the very first anime movies I ever watched.
It's gonna be great.
And
I'm really looking forward to it.
It's been over a decade since I've seen the original movie, so I'm looking forward to watching it again and seeing just how much if at all, my opinions of it have changed over the last decade.
Cool.
So definitely look forward to that. That will be our movie review for December, because this is our movie review for November.
Do you remember?
No, never again. Anyway, I think that's going to be a great place to end this. So thank you all there for dropping in to listen to us. Check the description below to find links to Anime Club, After Dark on Twitch, on social media, and on Discord. Check out our merch store and our affiliate links as well. Any purchases you do make there really help us out. With that, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, Natai.
Good night.
Beautiful.